So when I was preparing to talk this morning, I'm going to be speaking about a koan that I love, and but I all remember that it was in the Blue Cliff Record. I didn't remember kind of where it was. So I said, I'll go online and I'll Google it. And then I'll take some of the key phrases of the koan that I remember, Google them, and then they're going to tell me where the koan is. And so I came across a Dharma talk on the koan, and I was the author of that talk back in 2014. And I'm telling you this story because this goes to my whole ambivalence about Rick Hawks, which is, I have a belief that we have to keep the Dharma from becoming stagnant, and that the Dharma must be relevant in every moment of our lives. And 2014 was like a different world, a different universe. And in my talk at that time, I was responding to that. Today, I'm going to be responding to today. So in my mind, at least, going back to see those old talks, it's like reading Life magazine from 1959. It's interesting, but you wouldn't go to get updates on climate from 4-decade-old Life magazine, right? and so anyway, so I'm constantly ambivalent about it. And as Gary knows, I'm thinking about talking to my colleagues at Treetop about taking all my old talks off. Because the other thing, hopefully I've changed in 7 years. And my sense of the Dharma changes from week to week, from day to day. As some of you who are working with me in Daesan might be aware. And so, the internet works against that freshness, for lack of a better word. But enough said about that. We can talk about that more another time. But this is a favorite koan of mine. It's case 89 in the Blue Cliff Record. And the case is as thus. Yun Yen asked Tao Wu, what does the Bodhisattva of great compassion use so many hands and eyes for? Wu said, it is like someone reaching back, groping for a pillow in the middle of the night. Yen said, I understand. Wu said, how do you understand it? Yen said, all over the body are hands and eyes. Wu said, you have said quite a bit there, but you only said 8% of it. Yen said, what do you say, elder brother? Wu said, throughout the body are hands and eyes. Yeah. So I presume we all know that the Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, is generally depicted as having many arms. I can't put on the screen, and I only have two, but like and every arm, every palm of every hand has an eye in it. And the iconographic interpretation is that those eyes are looking down upon the world with compassion. They are viewing the struggling, the suffering in the world, able to bring the compassion of Avalokiteshvara. Of course, later became, in all the other cultures subsequent to India, became a woman rather than a man. And we have seen that compassion as feminine, right? Kuan Yin and so on. But in India, it was a male figure. Now, I like, one of the reasons I like this koan, I think, is when we struggle with compassion. We're a Mahayana practice. And what's the chief distinction about Mahayana practice? Well, in the earlier practices that we now talk about as Theravada, the key emphasis was on the archetype of the arhat and of personal enlightenment, right? And that was the goal of practice, of study, to be personally enlightened and to get off the wheel of life and death, right? To end the cycle of rebirth. That's how Theravadan Buddhism conceptualized itself. And I always need to say that the caveat is none of this is pure in that way anymore. Theravadan resembles Mahayana and vice versa. It's in the contemporary world, it's not as clearly distinct, but in the ancient world, there was this clear distinction. And then sometime after the life of Shakyamuni Buddha, 300 or 400 years or so, oh, lo and behold, a whole set of great sutras that the Buddha asked them to tuck away and not reveal till long after his death, because the world wasn't ready for these sutras yet. And those were the Mahayana sutras, the Mahayana teachings. You know, and however you understand that myth is to some extent irrelevant. But the distinction here is in Mahayana is longer about your personally getting off the wheel of life and death. Quite the opposite. It's about staying on to save all sentient beings. The archetype of the bodhisattva. The bodhisattva who sets aside their personal opportunity for nirvana and chooses to keep turning into samsara, into the suffering of the world to save all beings. The bodhisattva doesn't see their work as done as long as there's one being that's suffering. So a very different understanding of Buddhism. But I think to a certain extent, you know, if you look at Tibetan Buddhism, they clearly have a strong focus, they are Vajrayana, a little Mahayana, they're an outgrowth of Mahayana, but they have a strong focus on compassion. In Zen, compassion is not mentioned so often. It's not given the same emphasis. There's a certain belief in Zen, we have a certain ambivalence. It's like messy, it's too warm, cool, too cool for school in Zen, you know, and we, you know, this messy compassion stuff so much, and definitely not love. Okay, we just want to be very clear about that. So I can't think of many koans. This morning, the only koan I think of that directly dealt with compassion was this one. And I'm sure there are others, but I couldn't bring them to mind. So it gets a very small emphasis. And yet, if we understand Maha practice, it is the crux. It is the most essential thing that we can focus on. It is not our personal enlightenment. The goal of Mahayana practice is not to go into the forest and live a solitary life until we die. It's to come into the marketplace, the 10th ox herding picture, right? Coming into the marketplace with bliss bestowing hands. In a sense, Mahayana has an activist focus as opposed to the more passive focus of Theravadan Buddhism. So to the koan. Yunyan asked Dao Wu, what does the great bodhisattva of compassion use so many hands and eyes for? And Wu said it is like someone reaching back, groping for a pillow in the middle of the night. That is such a beautiful image. And I feel it so neatly, succinctly captures what our practice is all about, what our lives should be all about. How do we treat one another? Like reaching back up for a pillow in the middle of the night. How do we do our work? Like reaching back for a pillow in the middle of the night. How do we engage with the world? Like reaching back for a pillow in the middle of the night. Now, what does that mean? Why am I so enthralled with that image? Because that action, we've all done that, I'm sure. We don't think about it. We don't analyze it. We don't prepare for it. We don't compare with prior pillow reaching experiences, right? We just do it. It's a completely natural activity, unobstructed, unobscured. There's no ego in it. Oh, I'm going to do like a real reach and people are going to be so impressed, right? No ego there. We just do it naturally, you know? And then we wake up and all our bullshit comes back. But in that moment, it's this, you know, we're just acting from the place of essential nature. And essential nature is the place where our compassion dwells. Compassion should be our unobstructed response to our lives and to the world around us. And that's both complicated and difficult. It's remarkably simple to do at AM and not so easy to do at 9 a.m. I had a good example of that this weekend. So some of you know I was in for my son's wedding, and we went and Elizabeth and I stayed at a motel, which is something I haven't done since pre-COVID. And so we were kind of really excited, especially those of you who have been to our cabin may know, you know, we don't have running water. We don't have a few things here. So this is going to be great. We've got hot and cold running water and we're going to have we're going to have luxurious time. And so we get motel, and what it turns out, I'm going to make this long story short here, is that probably half or maybe even more, 2/3 of the people staying at this motel were people who were unhoused. Apparently the state of Vermont has a program where they're housing unhoused folks in hotels and motels. So there were many people there who were clearly homeless. You know, if they had many had bicycles, some had cars, but they were always kind of old, beat up looking cars and things. You kind of got a clear distinction that they were, you know, I paid a lot to stay at this motel because it was for the wedding. But clearly they were there on a different basis. Doesn't. But what happened, and I almost am ashamed, is how quickly all the negative narratives about people who are displaced and homeless came into my mind. And so instead of being fully and compassionate, I started like, why are they here? You know, I'm paying all this money and they get here and they pay, you know, just the crap that we hear in our society and we internalize. It's right there. My compassion was so fragile that I found, it was my work. It was my practice for the weekend. They were lovely people. They were quiet. They were fine. Oh, it was the opposite of issues. They were just nice folks. We had these, you know, kind of cognitive structures that we have about people who are housed. And even though I don't even believe or agree with any of them, there they were. Passion was so fragile. that it was part of my practice for the week to keep letting go of all that garbage and reminding myself of reality. These folks deserve to be housed. They need to be housed. That's a human right, basic, all the things that I know and believe that got obstructed. Activity of compassion requires constant work, especially in this society, in this culture. We as a culture have become so angry and so nasty and so hateful towards one another. And it's very difficult to live here and not contaminated by some of that stuff. It's so prevalent. So on one hand, compassion is our essential nature. It is our natural response to the world. And on the other hand, it is constantly being obstructed. Compassion takes work. Compassion is at the heart of our practice. So they go on in the koan. So Wu asks Yen how he understands it. And Yen says, all over the body are hand eyes. And Wu said, you've said quite a bit there, but you've only said 80% of it, 80%. And what do you say, elder brother? Throughout the body are hands, eyes. Everywhere. Our entire being responds when we respond with compassion. We immerse ourselves. We give ourselves fully to compassion and to the compassionate response to the world and the people and the beings around us. It takes work. My first wife and I separated 50 years ago, give or take a year. We hadn't spent any time together in 50 years. We just spent 2 days together at the wedding and with her family, and who I hadn't seen in an equal period of time. That was extraordinary. What a chance to heal. What a chance to find my compassion for her and for myself. I carry a lot of guilt and shame from that relationship, from that time in my life. I freely acknowledge an asshole. And I'm only a little less of an asshole now, but I was a lot more. Anyway, and so it took work. It takes work. All weekend I worked at not judging her, staying in that open place, that place of reaching the pillow and relating to her in this moment as to who she is right now. And similarly, giving myself permission to A, who I am now, and B, not to beat myself up over who I was then. I had to have compassion for myself for us to meet in this new moment, have this new possibility of being and engaging with one another's humanity. And I think that happened. It was such a healing experience to have, I'm very grateful that I will not go to my grave never having been able to have that reunion of sorts. But it's work. Compassion is work. So I don't know why, I'm not really sure why we don't pay more attention to compassion. It's where the rubber meets the road. It's absolutely so I see it, the whole point of the work that we do. We sit down on the cushions, not necessarily initially, we all come to Zen maybe for different reasons. And our own personal thing is often part of those reasons. And maybe it's curiosity, and maybe we're intrigued with Eastern thought or something. Whatever, those are the things that get us to the Christians initially. But as we mature as practitioners, it should ultimately be less about ourselves, more about the world, more about opening our being to promote healing, to promote peace, to promote understanding, to promote compassion. Pause there now, see what you folks have to say.
Well, Peter, first of all, I always appreciate you as our teacher, leading the way with vulnerability and just all sort of modeling for us how to be compassionate towards yourself and how to be vulnerable, and talking about seeing your ex and being an asshole 50 years ago, and how you felt about the unhomed people upon entering your motel. It's inspiring, that level of humbleness and vulnerability. So thank you as always for that. The other thing I want to say is, so I think I've told you a couple times, I practiced with a Tibetan group in Portland for a couple of years before I came here. And in that, compassion was drilled in pretty hard. I'm not drilled in, that's not the right way of saying it, but we were creating compassion structures in every meditation. And after a couple of years of that, I thought there has to be a sort of simpler way for me, just a simpler way than all these layers of compassion that we're doing in what they called contemplation exercises. And I think as I understand it with Zen, it is simpler. It's, instead of building up structures of compassion, it's taking away ego structures so that innate compassion can come through. So that seems more, for me, again, this is all for me, more elegant and more in the way that I wanted to practice then, and now being here for about a year and a half, it's coming to fruition. So I just wanted to say that.
Well, thank you. And now you have to wash your mouth out with soap, but again, I've never been a Tibetan practitioner, but I have some slight understanding of the things that you're talking about. And Zen, Zen does try to cut away everything that's non-essential. That's really, Daido Roshi used to talk about that at great length, that it was kind of paring down to the simplest skills to get to realization, and really beyond that, to getting to being in the world in a compassionate way. I just think we sometimes lose sight of that. And I had a conversation with Steph, my teacher. Well, Daido was my teacher also, but my later teacher. I was already a teacher when we were sitting and we were talking, and I said to him, do you think compassion needs to be cultivated? And he said, absolutely. So the Tibetans are really right in that. We just do it in, as you say, in a more, maybe a lot less structured way. but therefore we can also lose sight of it.
Just
To-
to
Go ahead.
reconfirm a little bit what Robert was saying is through my own practice and, really having only practiced Zen with any kind of diligence, I definitely have seen for myself the dropping. I still have plenty of an ego, but the dropping of the ego does allow for that compassion to develop that I didn't think was there. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, and this is a little just kind of off the cuff, the imagery from the koan, eyes and hands throughout, and the fact that the koan takes place while you're asleep. I was just thinking about it, in that when I'm awake, I only have two eyes and hands. When my ego is in control of me, I have two eyes and two hands. But when I'm asleep, or when I'm my ego has dropped away, hands and eyes throughout. And the other idea from all of that is, just the ability to see with my entire being, and with my eyes, and then the fact that throughout I can give my entire body to help to realize that compassion in a real way, as opposed to a conceptual. Anyways, rambling. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl.
Furthering Robert's comments relative to what we learned from you, Peter, what I was struck by in the two examples you were giving relative to compassion, one was with the unhomed and needing to dig deep to be compassionate towards them, rather than whatever preconceived notion you might have had about their lives and why don't they have homes? What are they doing here? But of course they need to be safe. But the other, relative to your ex and 50 years, the kindness and gentleness that you needed to nourish yourself with by saying, I was an asshole then, this is now, let me engage with these people with my full spirit and heart now, and recognize that that was then, this is now. So for me, it was two different dimensions of compassion, compassion towards others as well as compassion towards oneself. And it was enriching. So thank you.
I will say that, I don't think that compassion towards self shows up almost anywhere historically in Buddhism. In Zen, right, we got Dogen says to study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened to 10,000 things. That's what we're doing. That's our fundamental task, is forgetting the self. And so we went to a monastery in Japan or in China, or, and we said, well, I'd like to do a little work on self-compassion. They'd say, there's the gate. Get out. It's just not on the chart. It's not part of the practice. And so this, I think this is sort of uniquely American, that introducing it and allowing it, just as we've allowed a certain amount of psychology to creep into Zen in America, and vice versa. And now it's happening that actually that's getting seeded back into the Asian Zen cultures. They are learning from us in that regard. But to start, the idea of kind of, don't bother taking care of yourself. Get rid of yourself. And so we say, well, along the way, we've got to take care of ourselves. you know, and maybe it's a prerequisite of really open compassion. If we cannot embrace ourselves, it's, you know, it's very hard to fully embrace others.
I find that I need to keep my heart open. I need to notice when it's closing and open it. That's one thing. And the other thing is that Avalokiteshvara is, and Kuan Yin, that's us. It's everybody. Everybody helping when they can.
Thank you. That's, you know, keeping our heart open. That's another way of describing the work. You know, it's the disease of these times, closed-heartedness, right? All this anger and hatred and greed, you know, arising from the fact that our hearts close to the world, to one another and to the world. You know, and this comes back to the idea of the one body, right? This is truly one body, and it is all intimately interconnected on many levels. And therefore, when any in this world is hurt or wounded, I am hurt or wounded. If I allow myself to experience that. And that's hard, right? I mean, that's hard. You know, one of the things that I did at some point in the last few days, because I've been thinking this, is, you know, and I'm sure you've all encountered this, the way in which the internet is amplifying negativity and is amplifying anger and greed and all of these, the three poisons, you know. And so I looked at my news feed, and probably the first 15 items on my news feed were some type of disaster, something awful happening somewhere. And so on one level, yeah, that's the reality. That is the reality. There are fires and there are floods and there are wars, and all these horrible things are in fact happening. They are in fact part of the reality. But that's the other place. It is so easy if we are awake, to use it's the Buddhist term, it's also sort of the current term, and we are paying attention. It's so easy to get overwhelmed and flooded by all of that. You know, somebody that I read this week pointed out, brains were designed to function when we lived in small communities and tribes and villages. And so we are hardwired to take on a very finite number of inputs. Oh, I heard the other day that the farmer down the road had a fire barn or something. Oh, really? You know, that was kind of the level at which information was passing. If you were here in Maine, it might be 2 weeks before you heard about something that happened in Boston. You certainly didn't hear what was happening in Thailand and Cambodia and Australia and on and on. And we're hearing every one of those things. And so our brains get really overwhelmed, literally, you know, and our hearts get overwhelmed. And our tendency is to shut down, to tune it out, you know, and hence all the many forms of addiction that are going on right now. I come back to that before, you know, because people cannot, we pay a real price to be awake. And it's a really intricate dance these days. And I don't know how to do it. I'm working on it constantly. How do I stay engaged? How do I act? And how do I not get overwhelmed? And of course, others talk about and the despairing. Joanna Macy and others talk about this, right? This is another important component of our work. We have to be awake. We can't shut down. We have to keep our hearts open. Yet that's so hard. It's so hard.
Peter, I was on the board of the Kids First Center here in Portland for many years, which is an organization that works with separating, divorcing families and educating parents as to how to get through that process without hurting the children. And each year there would be a professional conference for mental health care workers and divorce attorneys focusing on that subject. And each year there would be a panel of children who would speak to the mental health people and the lawyers about what it was like going through divorce and living in two different households, having parents who are no longer together. And one of the comments that just stays with me year after year after year, because of its simplicity, I think shows how simple compassion can be. And I forget exactly what the question was, but someone had asked the kids to respond to things that were good in their life and ways that they felt happy about their parents' situation. And one of the kids said, well, when, Dad came to pick me up the other day and Mom walked me out to the door, the two of them said something and started laughing together. And that made me feel so good. And I think it's just a story of how simple compassion can be. And also, one of the mottos that the facilitators would use with parents was fake it till you make it. So even if you don't want to laugh with your co-parenting partner, put on a happy face and do it. And eventually it may become part of you. And that seems to be sort of like the hands on the body, eyes and hands on the body versus through the body. So even if you're not through yet, keep up as deep as you can get, and maybe you'll get there eventually.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you.
I just had one thought about self-compassion in Zen that, my ego is always thinking about things and it's, grasping at things and all that, it seems all these thoughts are the source of suffering. And I feel like when Dogen says, it's about letting go of the self, it's about letting go of that ego, that complex of thoughts is the source of suffering. So doing that, letting it go, really is self-compassion, for the self that isn't just ego. I feel like it's really being compassionate to myself to let go of all that stuff. So just thought I'd mention that.
Well, it is, Gary. And that's the core of our practice, is letting go, right? That's the heart of it. But I don't think that includes all possibilities. Like I need to not just let go, but I need to show up. I couldn't heal that old relationship by just letting go. Letting go was the prerequisite, right? And then I needed to show up. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, but for me, that
the same in terms of in terms of myself, I spent a lot of years letting go of guilt and shame and all that. Doesn't work. It works, but Nothing, none of this is absolute. None of this is complete, so it's there. It still resides. And that's okay. The other, the others that's not, again, not talked about in Zen. I mean, Robert talked about mobility and all this, but the reality is just a little bit of acceptance is another word, not this word. Just, the mess that we are is okay. Whoever we are today is perfectly all right. We're not living in becoming, we're living in being. We're not living in perfection, we're living in imperfection. Right? If any of you haven't read the book, The Spirituality of Imperfection, it's a wonderful book. And AA flavored, but really a lot of deep spiritual wisdom. And we're living in imperfection. And this, coming to terms with that is transformative. We're living, wounds and scars and traumas don't go away. As I'm sure Robert can attest from his work. He probably doesn't have many people walking out of his office saying, oh, that's it. I don't have this trauma anymore. I'm never, no, but we come to terms with it. We can soften it. We can become friends with it. That's a radical concept. Becoming friends with our imperfection, becoming friends with our wounds, becoming friends with our trauma. Now I'm way out in psychology. Zen, I left behind, but I think that's okay. I think it's part of what we have to do.
This Turner phrase comes to mind for me, which is no way but through. I think it's just it's a mantra that I've heard my partner say, and I've heard other people in my community say, no way but through. And I think something that's coming up for me in hearing you all speak, a lot of things are coalescing, and especially kind of Peter, what you said about kind of meeting those emotions, and this idea of the practice being not just to let the things fall away, but things fall away when we know them, when we become intimate to them. I think that's something I appreciate about this koan is it's turning the eyes inward before being able to have compassion for others. There's this process of shining the light of compassion inward and all through us. I also think something you said about our brains getting overwhelmed, and the skillfulness or the appropriateness of compassion as a medicine to kind of this brain overwhelm, especially with online social interaction. It's such a direct brain interaction, and it's not all through the body. And I'm just just thinking about the word compassion, and to me that's a feeling, passion, feeling, being with the feeling. So there's something there about connecting the body and being in an embodied form of interaction with both oneself and with others. That's so deeply important. And so much of our practice is in movement and in interaction and in fully expressed, not just through our brains.
Yeah, that's an important part of our practice is getting out of here, right? That's what letting go is all about. All the narratives that we create, all the structures that we create, all the ways in which we isolate us, insulate ourselves, obstruct reality. And again, perpetual task. I think it's, and I've said this before, I mean, this idea that there's a moment of realization and that everything after that is cool. No, it ain't that way. This is work that we do our entire lives. Realizing ourselves, gaining greater clarity, it is invaluable. But it does take, it's like you got to shovel the shit out of the barn every day, whether you're enlightened or not, that's a little more scatological than chop wood, carry water, but that kind of idea. Every day, it's our work till we die. We never arrive. We talk no attainment, nothing to attain. We don't go any place. We don't arrive anywhere. We've got to be right here doing the work. Oops, my battery is running low, and when it runs low, if I don't plug in, the computer's gonna die in about 30 seconds in this. I will run there. Watch out, Willie. Inside now. So I think that's telling me that we've talked too long. I in particular have. So why don't we say some vows?
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.